Good afternoon, everyone. We are Group 2 and we are here to tackle about the trait theory. Before we start, let me introduce to you my group mates. We have Padaw, the group leader, Bonyel, Sapigaw, Abenoja, Gasingan, Sebuma, Ginto, Rodio, and Molieno. Before we start to learn what is trait theory, let's watch this video.
I'm Sarah Hashimwaris in the Los Angeles Times newsroom. The father of Sandy Hook Elementary School shooter Adam Lanza has for the first time spoken publicly about his son. Adam Lanza killed 20 children and 6 teachers at the Connecticut school before killing himself. In interviews with New Yorker magazine, Peter Lanza said he's certain that his 20-year-old son, who shot and killed his mother before the December 2012 killing spree, would have also killed him if he had the chance. He also said he wishes that Adam was never born because, quote, you can't get any more evil than his son. The Times reports that Peter Lanza said Adam was 13 when a psychiatrist diagnosed him with Asperger's syndrome, a form of autism not associated with violence, and that he believes the syndrome could have masked schizophrenia. For more, visit LATimes.com and at LA Times on Twitter for the latest updates.
Senseless tragedies such as these help convince some criminologists that the root cause of crime may be linked to mental or physical abnormality. Like Adam Lanza, how could a young man engage in the mass murder of innocent children unless he was suffering from some form of mental instability or collapse? And yet, after those killings, there seemed to be ample evidence that Adam Lanza was under severe psychological stress, and no one can able to foresee or predict his violent action. But this vision is neither new nor unique. The image of a disturbed mentally ill offender seems plausible because more than one generation of one country, including Philippines, has grown up on films and TV shows that portray violent criminals as mental deranged and physical abnormal. Violence and animation nearly go hand in hand, and these days, the two are about as common as any TV show or movie genre there is. Superhero cartoons, action animations nearly require it, and everyone from little kids to teens to adults alike enjoy a little combat in their tunes. Example, Tom and Jerry, Family Guy, Powerpuff Girls, Happy Tree Friends, Dragon Ball Z, and many more animation and films that affect the behavior of an individual. Dahil sa mga palabas sa TV na napapanood ng mga kabataan o matatanda, ay nagiging dahilan ng paggawa nila ng krimen dahil sa impluwensya ng kanilang pinapanood, naaapektuhan nito ang kanilang tamang pag-iisip. The fact that each of us has a unique physical makeup and personality structure explain why when faced with the same life situation, one person commits a crime and becomes a chronic offender, whereas another attends school, church, and neighborhood function and obeys the laws of society. To understand this view of crime causation, we begin with a brief review of the development theories reported by Hans Bonyel.
Foundation of trait theory. Scientific method is first used in Europe. They use scientific method as a way of discovering rather than being a rational thinker. Instead of using thoughts and reason, European uses scientific method that helps new discoveries in biology, astronomy, and chemistry. Charles Darwin, A Cult of Science, 1809 to 1882. Darwin's discovery that all human activity could be verified by scientific principles. Sabihin daw na ang bawat ginagawa ng isang individual ay maaaring pabigyang dahilan sa pamamagitan ng siyensa. Auguste Comte, the founder of sociology, 1798 to 1857. Societies pass through stages that can be grouped on the basis of how people try to understand the world in which they live. Positivism. All true knowledge is acquired through direct observation and not through conjecture of belief. Statements that cannot be backed up by direct observation. The scientific method must be used if research findings are to be considered valid. Dagdag ko lamang na sa scientific method, meron itong 5 elements. Ito ay ang observation, hypothesis, test hypothesis, interpretation, at conclusion. According to the positivist tradition, social processes are a product of the measurable interaction between relationships and events. Human behavior, therefore, is a function of a variety of forces. Some are social, such as the effect of wealth and class. Others are political and historical, such as war and famine. Other forces are more personal and psychological, such as an individual's brain structure and his or her biological makeup or mental ability. Biological positivism. Ito yung pinakaunang scientific studies. Biological positivism applies positivist model to criminology by socioeconomist J.K. Lavater, phrenologist Franz Joseph Gall, and Johann K. Spurzheim. Phrenologists facial features of criminals to determine whether the shape of the ears, nose, and eyes and the distance between them were associated with antisocial behavior. According daw sa biological positivism, ang physical traits and biological remarks ay may kinalaman sa behavior ng isang individual. Phrenologists believe that external cranial characteristics dictates which area of the brain control physical activities. Cesar Lombroso, father of modern criminology, a physician who served much of his career in the Italian army, was studying the cadavers of executed criminals in an effort to scientifically determine whether law violators were physically different from people or conventional values and behavior. Charles Darwin or si Cesar Lombroso ay nag-aral about biological positivism, atavistic anomalies, the physical characteristics that distinguish born criminals from the general population and are throwbacks to animals or primitive. Sabihin daw, makikita sa Criminal anthropology. Criminal anthropology early efforts to discover a biological basis of crime through measurement of physical and mental process. Biological determinism. A belief that criminogenic traits can be acquired through indirect heredity from a degenerate family whose members suffered from such ills as insanity, syphilis, and alcoholism, or through direct heredity being related to a family of criminals. According to biological determinism, ang behavior daw ng isang tao ay maaaring mamana sa pamamagitan ng dugo. Kung halimbawa nito ay ang pamilya ni person A ay nag-suffer sa pagiging addict sa alak, merong sakit sa pag-isip, maaari daw itong mamana at maaaring maging kriminal. Lombroso's contemporaries. Certain shared physical characteristics indicate a criminal nature. A lower of heredity degree of sensibility to physical pain seems to be demonstrated by the readiness with which prisoners submit to the behavior operation of tattooing. The legacy of biological criminology. Lombroso's contemporaries is regarded today as a historical curiosity, not a scientific fact. Strict biological determinism is no longer taken seriously. Sociobiology. Sociobiology differs from earlier theories of behavior in that it stresses that biological and genetic conditions affect how social behaviors are learned and perceived. Meaning, na lahat daw ang biological remarks daw ay may kinalaman sa behavior ng isang individual. Sociobiologists view that gene as the ultimate unit of life that controls all human destiny. Contemporary trait theories. The study of sociobiology revived interest in finding a biological basis of crime and delinquency. It follows that it should also be responsible for determining whether a person chooses law violating or conventional behavior. Individual vulnerability versus differential susceptibility. It is a two views on how this interaction unfolds. In the individual vulnerability model suppose a direct link between traits and crime. Some people develop physical or mental condition at birth or sooner thereafter that affect their social functioning no matter where they live or how they are raised. Differential susceptibility model suggests that there is an indirect association between traits and crime. Some people possess physical or mental traits make them vulnerable to adverse environmental influence. According to the Body Build or Somatotype School, there are three types of body build were identified. That is identified. Una yung mesomorphs. Mesomorphs have well-developed muscles and an athletic appearance. They are active, aggressive, sometimes violent, and the most likely to become criminals. So, ibig sabihin, pasok ito sa biological positivism. Endomorphs. They have heavy builds and are slow-moving. They are known for lethargic behavior, rendering unlikely to commit violent crime and more willing to engage in less strenuous criminal activities.
Biosocial theory. Next slide. Rather than viewing the criminals as a person whose behavior is controlled solely by conditions determined at birth, most biocriminologists believe that physical, environmental, and social conditions work in concert to produce human behavior. This integrated approach is commonly referred to as biosocial theory. Biosocial theory is an idea that environmental and biological factors are related to antisocial behavior and also the other factors that affect the human behavior. Biosocial conditions present at birth or soon after can have a long-term effects on people's life and behavior. Based on the study, breastfeed babies have a greater behavior and more emotional stable than those who bottle feed. Those bottle feed babies is more tended to display troublesome traits like neediness, anxiety, lying, and stealing. Next slide. Biochemical condition and crime. Some trait theories believe that biochemical conditions, including both those are genetically predetermined and those acquired through diet and environment, control and influence antisocial behavior. The influence of damaging chemical and biological contaminants may begin before birth. If the mother's diet either lacks or has an excess of important nutrients such as manganese, that may later cause developmental problems in her offspring. Some of the more important biochemical factors that have been linked to criminality are set out here in details. Next slide. First is exposure to smoking and drinking. We all know that smoking cigarette and drinking alcohol is too bad for pregnant women because it can cause prenatal damage and subsequent antisocial behavior when the offspring get into his adolescent point. Smoking can lead the offspring into a psychopath or predicts other disorder. And having a smoking parent had a greater effect on behavior than the other influencers. In drinking alcohol, People who drink at the age of 14 is more likely become alcoholic than the other who hold drinks until the age of 21. Drinking alcohol in the early age can affect the growth of the brain, and when they get into adolescent point, drinking can be more direct and harmful influence on behavior. Next is exposure to chemicals and minerals. Overuse or take of chemicals and minerals can affect human behaviors, and other medicine can change our behavior because of the side effect. For example, Viagra. It can make the human to be aggressive, and due to that aggressiveness, human can do crimes. Also, excessive take of metal medicine like iron, mercury, and etc., it can be cause of neurological dysfunction or brain dysfunction. It can make the offspring have an attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or ADHD and intellectual impairment. Next is diet and crime. Having a healthy diet can reduce the chance to do some violence or crime, and having a poor diet or improper diet can lead or have a big chance to do some violence and crime. Due to lack of chemicals and minerals in the body, including sodium, potassium, calcium, and etc., can lead to depression, mania, cognitive problems, memory loss, and also abnormal sexual activity. In contrast, excessive amount of harmful ingredients that are routinely used in candies and sodas can elevate hyperactivity scores and link to antisocial behavior. Based on the famous experiment of Adrian and his colleagues, people who has nutritious diet had a greater level of mental health and had a lower level of self-reported crimes than the malnourished children. Next slide. Next is sugar intake. We all know that sugar or sweets can provoke hostile, impulsive, otherwise antisocial behaviors. A British study of the term effect of the childhood diet on adult violence found that the kids age of 10 who engage in excessive consumption of confectionery were the ones who most likely to be convicted for violence in adulthood. Next is glucose metabolism or hypoglycemia. Hypoglycemia, also known as low blood sugar, has linked to outbursts of antisocial behavior and violence. Several studies had related assault and fatal sexual offenses to hypoglycemia reactions. It is connected with a syndrome characterized by aggressive and assaultive behavior, glucose disturbance, and brain dysfunction. The high levels of hypoglycemia have been found in groups of habitual violence and impulsive offenders. Next is hormonal influences. Hormonal can cause areas of the brain to become less sensitive to environmental stimuli. The two most commonly pointed are androgens and testosterone. Male hormones linked to aggression decreasing hormonal levels as men get older is one for declining crimes rate over the life course. Next is premenstrual syndromes. Females are more sensitive and do suffer from anxiety when are on their menstrual period. They are more likely to commit suicide and be aggressive and otherwise antisocial just before and during menstruation. Next is allergies. Allergies are our body's reaction to normally harmless substances such as pollen, molds, animal dander, certain foods, and etc. Neuroallergies and cerebral allergy problems have also linked to hyperactivity and antisocial behavior. Cerebral allergy causes an excessive reaction in the brain, whereas neuroallergies affect the nervous system. And the best, for example, this is food. Food is most commonly involved in producing allergies. Next is environmental contaminants. This is the substance that can affect the nervous system of the offspring. For example, is hair solution or pesticides. It can affect the offspring by developmental delays and emotional problem when the pregnant woman exposed in that kind of chemical. Next is lead ingestion. Lead ingestions linked to antisocial behavior. Research shows that almost any evaluated level of lead ingestion is related to lower IQ scores. That factor linked to aggressive behavior, and it begins in the womb due to the mother's dietary consumption of food, such as seafood. Seafood is high in lead content. So, offspring will be exposed in the lead, and it can cause the offspring to have subsequent behavior.
Neurophysiological conditions and crime. This lesson focuses on neurophysiology, the study of brain activity. Neurological and physical abnormalities are acquired as early as the fetal or prenatal stage or through birth delivery trauma, and they control behavior throughout the lifespan. Dito nagmumula ang paghina ng mga mahalagang tungkulin ng ating utak at nagiging aresibo din ng ating pag-uugali. Children who suffer from measurable neurological deficit at birth are believed to also suffer from a number of antisocial traits throughout their life course, ranging from habitual lying to antisocial violence. Example of this is repeatedly violating the rights of others through intimidation and dishonesty, pagiging mapusok o kabiguang magplano ng maaga, puot, matinding pagkamayamutin, pagkabalisa, pagsalakay o karahasan, kawalan ng pakialam para sa pakiramdam ng iba at hindi nagsisisi sa pananakit ng iba. To have more idea about the association between neurological disorder and antisocial behavior may take a number of different paths. Neurological disorder and antisocial behavior. Direct association. Neurological deficit may be a direct cause of antisocial behavior, including violent offending. Dahil sa abnormality ng utak ng isang tao, nawawalan sila ng pakialam sa mga bagay na kanilang gagawin kahit pa mapahamak sila or masaktan sila emotionally or physically. Ang mga taong madalas na nakakaranas nito ay may mga depression, anxiety, and addiction. It's called self-destructive behavior. Clinically, analysis of convicted murders found that a significant numbers show evidence of brain abnormalities, including epilepsy, traumatic brain damage, childhood encephalitis, meningitis causing brain damage, genetic disorders, unspecified brain damage. Indirect association. Being in possession of neurological impairment leads to the development of personality traits that are linked to antisocial behaviors. For example, impulsivity and lack of self-control have been linked to antisocial behavior. Neurological impairment to the prefrontal cortex reduce levels of self-control, and this reduction in self-control leads to increased level of aggregation. There is now evidence that self-control may in fact be regulated and controlled by the prefrontal cortex of the brain. Interactive cause. Neurological deficit may interact with another trait or social condition to produce antisocial behaviors. According to Dr. Adrian Rain, ang mga batang nakakaranas ng birth complication ay nagpapakita ng neurological impairment and also that experience maternal rejection. Ito yung mga babaeng victim of rape. As they matured, were more likely to engage in criminal offending than boys who did not experience these symptoms. The combination of neurological dysfunction and maternal rejection had a more powerful influence on behavior than either of these conditions alone. Measuring neurological impairment. There are numerous ways to measure neurological functioning, including memorization and visual awareness tests. Short-term auditory to distinguish criminal offenders from non-criminal control groups traditionally. The most important measure of neurophysiological functioning is the electroencephalograph, EEG, which records the electrical impulses given off by the brain. Studies using the EEG find that violent criminals have far higher levels of abnormal EEG recording than nonviolent or one-time offenders. Studies of adults have associated slow and bilateral brain waves with hostile, hypercritical, irritable, non-comforting, and impulsive behavior. Newer brain scanning techniques using electronic imaging such as positron emission tomography or PET, brain electrical activity mapping or BEAM, single photon emission computed tomography or SPECT, and the superconducting quantum interference device or SQUID have made it possible to assess which areas of the brain are directly linked to antisocial behavior. Some research using PET shows that domestic violent offenders have lower metabolism in the right hypothalamus and decreased correlation between cortical and subcortical brain structures than a group of control subjects. According to Daniel Amen and his colleagues, employed SPECT to test a sample of people convicted of an impulsive murder, they found that these offenders suffered from a condition that reduced blood flow to a region of the brain involved with planning and self-control. Because this area of the brain is believed to control anger management, those who suffer reduced blood flow may be limited in their self-control, planning, and understanding of future consequences when challenged or forced to concentrate. It is possible that antisocial behavior is influenced by what is referred to as prefrontal dysfunction, a condition that occurs when demands on brain activity overload the prefrontal cortex and result in a lack of control over antisocial behaviors because of the prefrontal lobe is not developed in adolescence. It is not surprising that this is the time that violent behavior peaks. Prefrontal dysfunction. Studies carried out in the United States and elsewhere have shown that both criminals and substance abusers have impairment in the prefrontal lobe, thalamus, medial temporal lobe, and superior parietal and left angular gyrus areas of the brain. Impairments in EF have been implicated in a range of development disorder, ADHD, conduct disorder, CD, autism, and Tourette syndrome. EF impairments also have been implicated in a range of neuropsychiatric and medical disorders, including schizophrenia, major depression, alcoholism, structural brain disease, diabetes, and normal aging. There is suspected link between brain dysfunction and conduct disorder, CD, which is considered a precursor of long-term chronic offending. With children with CD lie, steal, bully other children, gets into fights frequently, schools and parent rules, many are callous and lack empathy or guilt, adolescents boy with antisocial and drug-using behaviors. Research have linked this misfiring in particular areas of the brain and suppress neutral activity. Researching the brain. Research psychiatrist Guido Frank that aggressive teen behavior may be linked to the amygdala, an area of the brain that processes information regarding threats and fear, and to a lessening of activity in the frontal lobe, a brain region linked to decision making and impulse control. Frank investigated why some teenagers are more prone than others to reactive aggression, that is unpremeditated aggression in response to a trigger. For example, an accidentally bumped from a passerby. He found that reactively aggressive adolescents, most commonly boys, frequently misinterpret their surroundings, feel threatened, and act inappropriately aggressive. They tend to strike back when being teased, blame others when getting into a fight, and overreact to accident. Their behavior is emotionally hot, defensive, impulsive. Teens with this behavior are at high risk for lifelong social, career, or legal problems. This research helps us to explain what goes on in the brains of some teenage boys who respond with inappropriate anger and aggression to perceived threats. It is possible that rather than having a social or environmental basis, such behavior is associated with brain functioning and not environment, socialization, personality, or other social and psychological functions. Minimal brain dysfunction or MBD, an abruptly appearing maladaptive behavior that interrupts an individual lifestyle and life flow. In its most serious form, MBD has been linked to serious antisocial act, an imbalance in the urge control mechanism of the brain, and a chemical abnormality. Because of the minimal brain dysfunction, there are several abnormal behavior patterns like dyslexia. Dyslexia is a learning disorder that involves difficulty reading due to problems identifying speech, sounds, and learning how they relate to letters and words decoding. Also code reading disability, dyslexia affects areas of the brain that process language. Second, visual perception problems or visual processing disorder, an eye problem, refers to deficit in the ability to make sense of information that is taken in through the eyes. Deficit with visual processing affect how visual information is interpreted or processed by the brain. Third, hyperactivity means a person may seem to move about constantly, including in situations when it's not appropriate, or excessively fidgets, stops, or talks. In adult, hyperactivity may mean extreme restlessness or talking too much. Last, poor attention span. Short attention span if you often feel restless, agitated, or fidgety when trying to focus on tasks. Temper tantrums are unpleasant and disruptive behavior or emotional outbursts. They often occur in response to unmet needs or desire. Tantrums are more likely to occur in younger children or others who cannot express their needs or control their emotion when they are frustrated. Aggressiveness implies a disposition to dominate, often in disregard of others' right or indeterminate and energetic pursuit of one's ends. One type of minimal brain dysfunction is manifested through episodic periods of explosive rage. This form of the disorder is considered an important cause of such behavior as spouse beating, child abuse, suicide, aggressiveness, and motiveless homicide. One perplexing feature of this syndrome is that people who are afflicted with it often maintain warm and unpleasant personality between episodes of violence. Learning disability. One specific type of MBD that has generated considered interest is learning disability, a disorder in one or more of the basic psychological process involved in understanding or using spoken or written language. Learning disabled children usually exhibit poor motor coordinator. For example, problems with poor hand-eye coordination, trouble climbing stairs, clumsiness, behavioral problems, lacks of emotional control, hostility, cannot stay on task, and have improper auditory and vocal responses, do not seem to hear, cannot differentiate sound and noises. Though learning disabilities are quite common, approximately 10% of all youth have some forms of learning. Estimates of LD among kids who engage in antisocial behavior is far higher. What is the association between learning disability and crime? There are two popular explanations. Susceptibility rationale, that the link is caused by certain side effects of learning disability, such as impulsiveness, poor ability to learn from experience, and inability to take social cues. Pangalawa, social failure rationale, assumes that the frustration caused by the LD produced poor school performances, leading to a negative self-image and acting out behavior. At sa kabuuan ng pananaliksik ni Tomer Einat at Amela Einat, mas malaki daw ang posibilidad na maging isang kriminal ang isang sumuko sa pag-aaral at early age kaysa sa mga individual na mayroon o walang learning disabilities na hindi tumigil sa pag-aaral. Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, ADHD. Many parents have noticed that their children do not pay attention to them. They run around and do things in their own way. It is a symptom of ADHD, a psychological disorder in which a child shows developmentally inappropriate impulsivity, hyperactivity, and lack of attention. Ang isang taong may ADHD ay nakakaranas ng kulang sa atensyon, paggawa ng mga bagay na hindi na iniisip, at pagiging hyper sa lahat ng bagay. Mga madalas na nakakaranas nito ay mga kalalakihan. ADHD has been associated with poor school performances, grade retention, placement in special need classes, bullying, stubbornness, and lack of response to discipline, although the origin of ADHD is unknown. But most commonly, a person with ADHD has a divorced or separated parents. Symptoms of Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, ADHD. Lack of attention, frequently fails to finish projects, that not seem to pay attention, does not sustain interest in play activities, cannot sustain concentration on schoolworks or related tasks, is easily distracted, frequently acts without thinking, often calls out in class, does not want to wait for his or her turn in lines or games, shift from activity to activity, cannot organize tasks or work, require constant supervision, and last, hyperactivity, constantly runs around and climbs on things, show excessive motor activity while asleep, cannot sit still, is constantly fidgeting, does not remain in his seat or sit in class, is constantly on the go like a motor. Kaya naman kung nakakaranas ka ng ganito sa sarili mo, magpa-check up ka na. Baka meron ka na ding ADHD. A series of research studies now link ADHD to the onset and sustenance of a criminal career. Children with ADHD are more likely than non-ADHD youths to use illicit drugs, alcohol, and cigarette, be physically aggressive, and engage in sex offenses in adolescence. Jason Fletcher and Barbara Wolfe. Among the many studies that have evaluated the ADHD crime link, Jason Fletcher and Barbara Wolfe evaluated data on nearly 14,000 individuals participating in the national longitudinal studies of adolescent health and found that children with ADHD are at heightened risk for criminality as adults. Patricia Westmoreland. Another recent study by Patricia Westmoreland and her associates, which assessed more than 300 randomly selected prison inmates, found that more than 20% could be diagnosed with ADHD, and these inmates were more likely to report emotionally and social problems, and also had higher rates of mood, anxiety, psychotic, antisocial, and borderline personality disorders. How is ADHD treated? The most typical treatment is doses of stimulant such as Adderall and Ritalin, which ironically help control emotional and behavioral outbursts. However, treatment is not always effective, but those children who are treated with ADHD improve. Tumors, lesions, injury, and disease. The presence of brain tumors and lesions has also been linked to a wide variety of psychological, including personality changes, hallucination, and psychotic episodes. Persistent criminality has been linked to lesion in the frontal and temporal regions of the brain, which play an important role in regulating and inhibiting human behavior, including formulating plans and controlling intentions. There is evidence that people with tumors are prone to depression, irritability, temper outbursts, and even homicidal attacks. Dahil sa tumor na nasa kanilang utak, nagkukos ito ng behavior changes na nagiging dahilan upang makasakit sila ng ibang tao. In addition, brain tumor is caused by head injuries in accidents such as falls or auto crashes. Brain chemistry. Chemical compounds called neurotransmitter influence or active brain function, those studied in relation to aggression and other antisocial behaviors include dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin, monoamine oxidase or MAO, and gamma-aminobutyric acid or GABA. Low levels of MAO. To high levels of violence and property crime, as well as defiance of punishment, impulsivity, hyperactivity, poor academic performance, sensation-seeking, and risk-taking, and recreational drug use. Abnormal levels of MAO may explain both individual and group differences in the crime rate. Because this linkage has been found, it is not uncommon for violence-prone people to be treated with antipsychotic drugs such as Haldol, Stelazine, Prolixin, and Risperidone help control levels of neurotransmitters. They are sometimes referred to as chemical restraint or chemical stir jackets. Arousal theory. It has long been suspected that obtaining thrills is a crime motivator. Adolescents may engage in crimes such as shoplifting and vandalism simply because they offer the attraction of getting away with it. From this perspective, delinquency is a thrilling demonstration of personal competence according to arousal theory. A view of crime suggests that people who have a high arousal level seek powerful stimuli in their environment to maintain an optimal level of arousal. These stimuli are often associated with violence and aggression. Sociopaths may need greater than average stimulation to bring them up to comfortable levels of living. These needs explain their criminal tendencies. The latter are sensitive seekers who seeks out stimulating activities which may include aggressive violent behavior patterns. According to Adrian Raine, evidence that some people may have lower levels of arousal comes from studies on resting heart rate levels conducted by Adrian Raine and his associates, who found that antisocial children have lower resting heart rates than the general population. Raine has also speculated that some people lack fear and are non-responsive to the threat of punishment, a condition that allows them to feel relatively comfortable while engaging in antisocial encounters. People who have low arousal level will seek out risky situation and become more involved with criminal behavior as an avenue toward thrill-seeking. Sinasabi ni Adrian Raine ng mga taong may mababang arousal level ay sila yung mga taong kahit sobrang risky ng situation, hindi nila yun napapansin as long as nafe-feel nila yung thrill dun sa ginagawa nila. Because lack of fear and thrill-seeking behavior are characteristic of adult psychopaths. Antisocial children might therefore develop into psychopath as an adult. Ito yung mga taong hindi na natatakot sa punishment. Kasi nga sa sobrang baba ng arousal nila, sa baba nung parang yung hindi nila nararamdaman yung kaba nila para gawin yung isang bagay. That factors that determine a person's levels of arousal are not fully determined, but suspected sources include brain chemistry and brain structure. Some people have brains with many more nerve cells with receptor site for neurotransmitter than others. Heart rate. Another view is that people with low heartbeat rates are more likely to commit crimes because they seek stimulation to increase their feeling of arousal to normal levels. Kaya naman dito, kaya sila gumagawa ng mga crime, kaya sila nagko-commit ng crime. Sinusubok nila yung sarili nila kung kakabahan ba sila dun sa sitwasyon na ginagawa nila para mag-increase din yung arousal, yung pansarili nilang arousal. Autonomic nervous system. Some biosocial theories link arousal to the autonomic nervous system as measured by skin conductance response. In some, brain structure, chemistry, and development are believed to exert a strong influence on human behavior.
Genetics and crime. Another biosocial theme is that the human traits associated with criminality have a genetic basis. There are actually two views of the genetics crimes. According to the direct view, antisocial behavior is inherited. The genetic makeup of parents is passed on to children, and genetic abnormality is directly linked to a variety of antisocial behaviors. According to the indirect views, genes are related to some personality or physical trait, which in turn is linked to antisocial behavior. Genetic makeup may shape friendship patterns and orient people toward deviant peer associations, which cause them to become crime prone. Adolescent attachments to parents may be controlled by the genetic makeup. Attachment that is weak and attenuated has been linked to criminality. Sinasabi dito na ang criminality ay mayroong genetic basis. And according sa direct view, ang genetic makeup ng parents ay pwedeng maipasa sa kanilang mga anak, or na ito ay namamana. Testing genetic theory. If criminal tendencies are inherited, then it stands to reason that the children of criminal parents should be more likely to become law violators than the offspring of conventional patterns. A number of studies have found that parental criminality and deviance do, in fact, have an powerful influence on delinquent behavior. One recent study of violent offending in Sweden used a variety of parent comparisons between spouse and found evidence that the genetic basis for violent crime was moderate to strong. Some of the most important data on parental deviance have been gathered as part of a long-term study of English youth called the Cambridge Study in Delinquent Development. This research followed a group of about 1,000 males from the time they were 8 years old until they reached their adulthood. The males in the study were repeatedly interviewed and their school and police records evaluated. This data indicate that a significant number of delinquent youths had criminal fathers, while 8% of the sons of non-criminal fathers eventually became chronic offenders. About 37% about 37% of youths with criminal fathers were multiple offenders. Analysis of the data confirms that delinquent youths grow up to become the parents of antisocial children. One specific form of aggressive behavior that seems to be inherited is schoolyard bullying. Bullies have children who bully others, and these second generation bullies grow up to become the fathers of children who are also bullies in a never-ending cycle. Ang kalagahan ng study na ginawa ng Cambridge Study in Delinquent Development is nagpapakita kung paano namamana ng isang bata ang pag-uugali ng kanyang mga magulang. Halimbawa na nga lang nung sinasabi nito na ang specific form of aggressive behavior na kadalasan namamana ay ang schoolyard bullying. Ang isang bully na magulang ay nagkakaroon ng anak na bully at magkakaroon ng anak pa na bully at paulit-ulit lang ito at never-ending cycle. It is possible, of course, that the genetic effect of parental deviance may be exaggerated by mating practices. It appears to be a genetic transfer when the child of two drug abusers become a drug abuser too. But it's also possible that this antisocial family consists of people who have suffered labeling and stigma, isolating them to the economic and social mainstream and increasing their chances of criminality. While it may appear that drug-abusing parents produce children who are genetically predisposed to drug abuse, it is also possible that what appears to be a genetic effect is actually the product of social processes. Next is sibling similarities. It stands to reason that if, it, if the cause of crime is in part genetic, then the behavior of siblings should be similar because they share genetic material. Ang sinasabi naman dito, if magkapatid kayo, sinasabi na magkakaroon kayo ng same behavior because meron kayong shared genetic material. Research does show that if one sibling engages in antisocial behavior, so do his or her brothers and sisters. The effect is greater among same-sex siblings. Sibling pairs who report warm, mutual relationship and shared friends are the most likely to behave in a similar fashion. Those who maintain a close relationship also have similar rate of crimes and drug abuse. While the similarity of siblings' behavior seems striking, what appears to be a genetic effect may also be explained by other factors. Siblings who live in the same environment are influenced by similar social and economic factors. Sabi dito na pag ang magkapatid ay na magkasama sa same environment, magkakaroon sila ng impluensya both social and economic factors. Kumbaga pareho sila ng makukuha ang influence sa iba. Deviant siblings may grow closer because of shared interests. Younger siblings who admire their older siblings may imitate the eldest behavior. Halimbawa, bunso ay idol niya si kuya. Gagayahin niya lahat ng mga gagawin ni kuya kahit mali or tama ito. The deviant sibling forces or threatens the brothers or sisters into committing criminal acts. Kumbaga, ako, kapatid mo ako, or kapatid kita, hinihingayat kita na gumawa ng mga bagay na mali or alam kong hindi tama or masama. Siblings living in a similar environment may develop similar type of friend. It is peer behavior that is the critical influence. The influence of peers may negate any observed interdependence of sibling behavior. Twin behavior. As mentioned above, because siblings are usually brought up in the same household and share common life experience, any similarity in the antisocial behavior might be a function of environmental influences and experience and not genetics at all. To guard against this, biosocial theories have compared the behavior of same-sex twins and again the found concordance in their behavior patterns. However, an even more rigorous test of genetic theory involves comparison of the behavior of identical monozygotic or MZ twins with fraternal dizygotic DZ twins. While the former have an identical genetic makeup, the latter share about only 50% of the genetic combination. Research has shown that MZ twins are significantly closer in their personal characteristics such as intelligence than are DC twins. Uh, Monozygotic or MC twins or is example of identical twins. They are identical twins, have identical copies of all their genes. In contrast, DC twins or dizygotic twins are fraternal twins, share on average only half of their genes by descent as do ordinary siblings. Sabi dito na research has shown that MZ twins are significantly closer in their personal characteristics such as intelligence than are DC twins. Pinapaliwanag dito na mas mayroong kalamangan or mas close sa personal characteristic ang MC twins kumpara sa DC twins. One famous study of twin behavior still underway is the Minnesota Twin Family Study. This research compares the behavior of MZ and DC twin pairs who were raised together with others who were separated at birth and in some cases did not even know of each other's existence. The study shows some striking similarities in behavior and ability for twin pairs raised apart. An MC twin reared away from a co-twin has about as good a chance of being similar to the co-twin in terms of personality, interest, and attitude as one who has been reared with his or her co-twin. To conclusion, similarities between twins are due to genes, not the environment. Ang ginawa naman dito is yung MZ twins is pinaghiwalay nga, pero sinasabi pa rin na kahit na magkaiwalay yung MC twins meron pa rin silang pagkakapareho sa personality, mga interest, at attitude. At sinasabi din na similarities between twins are due to genes and not the environment. Next is adoption studies. One way of avoiding the pitfalls of twin studies is to focus attention on the behavior of adoptees. It seems logical that if the behavior of adopted children is more closely aligned to that of their biological parents than to that of their adopted parents, then the idea of a genetic basis for criminality would be supported. If, on the other hand, adoptees are more closely aligned to the behavior of their adopted parents than their biological parents, an environmental basis for crime would seem more valid. So sabi dito na even though na ang isang bata is na-adapt ng isang pamilya, sinasabi pa rin na na kahit yung biological na magulang nila is hindi nila na-inherit yung pag-uugali or mga pamumuhay nila. It seems that environmental basis for crime would seem more valid. Several studies indicate that some relationship exists between biological parents' behavior and the behavior of their children, even when their contact has been non-existent. One analysis of Swedish adoptees also found that genetic factors are highly significant, accounting for 59% of the variation in the petty crime rates. Boys who had criminal parents were significantly more likely to violate the law. Environmental influence and economic status were significantly less important, explaining about 19% of the variance in crime. Nonetheless, having a positive environment, such as being adopted in the more affluent home, help inhibit genetic predisposition. Next is evaluating genetic research. The genes-crime relationship is controversial because it implies that the propensity to commit crime is present at birth and cannot be altered. It raises moral dilemmas if in uterogenetic testing could detect a gene for violence and violence gene may found to be present. What could done as precautionary measure? Some critics suggest that available evidence provides little conclusive proof that crime is genetically predetermined. Detractors point to the inadequate research design and weak methodologies of supporting research. The newer, better designed research studies critics charge provide less support than earlier. Less methodologically sound studies, a recent review by Calibert and Ronald Simons conclude that existing research on the heredity and crime is hopelessly flawed. These researchers go on to suggest that this area of research be abandoned. The reason is that environment and genetic functioning are so interrelated that it may be impossible to separate out the true effect of each of these factors.
Evolutionary theory. Some criminologists believe the human traits that produce violence and aggression are produced through the long process of human evolution. According to this evolutionary view, the competition for scarce resources has influenced and shaped the human species. Meaning to say, ang pakikipaglaban dun sa pangangailangan ng tao ayun yung nakaka-influence o nakakapagbabago ng human species. Over the course of human existence, people whose personal characteristics enable them to accumulate more than others are the most likely to breed and dominate the species. People have been shaped to engage in action that promote their well-being and ensure the survival and reproduction of their genetic line. Male who are impulsive risk takers may be able to father more children because they are reckless in their social relationships and have sexual encounter with their numerous partner. So sabi dito, kapag ang lalaki daw ay impulsive risk takers, impulsive risk taker, may mas may posibilidad na magkakaroon siya ng maraming anak dahil dun sa sexual encounter with their numerous partner. If according to evolutionary theories, such behavior patterns are inherited. Impulsive behavior becomes intergenerational, passed down from father to son. Meaning to say, yung behavior daw is namamana o naipapamana. Yung kung anong ugali nung ama, pwedeng namana niya o naipamana or pwede niyang ipamana dun sa magiging anak niya. It is not surprising then the human history has been marked by war, violence, and aggression. Ruston theory of race and evolution. One of the most controversial versions of evolutionary theory was formulated by J. Philippe Rushton and first appeared in his 1995 book Race, Evolution, and Behavior. According to Rushton, there is evidence that modern humans evolved in Africa about 2,000 years ago and then began to migrate outward to present day Europe and Asia. He posits that the further north element of the population migrated, the more they encounter harsher climates, which produce gather and store food, gain shelter, make clothes, and raise children successfully during prolonged winter. So, sabi dito, yung mga nagmamigrate doon na tao na kapag nakaka-encounter sila nung masamang panahon, so nagpuproduce sila ng mga at nag-iimbak sila ng pagkain, naghanap sila ng matutuluyan at mga damit at kailangan mapalaki nila yung mga anak nila yung anak nila during prolonged winter o yung mahabang winter. As this population evolved into present day, Europeans and Asia, their brain mass increased and they develop slower rates of maturation and lower level of sex hormones. This physical change produced reduction in sexual potency and aggression and increase in family stability and longevity. These evolutionary change are responsible for present day crime rate difference between race. Rushton's works was received harshly by critics who condemned his definition of race crime and accused him of racial bias. So critics criticized Rushton's work, accusing him of racial bias and rejecting his definition of race and crime. Among the many critics hurled at Rushton has been his singular focus on street crime, such as theft, while giving short shrift to white collar and organized crime, which are predominantly committed by crime. So sabi ng mga kritiko, nakapokus lang daw si Rushton dun sa street crime, parang yung theft na mas kadalasan nakikita o ginagawa ng mga whites. Rushton ignores the fact that men are much more criminal than women, even though there is little evidence of significant differences in intelligence or brain size between genders. So hindi naniniwala si Rushton na mas kriminal yung mga lalaki kaysa sa mga babae. RK selection theory. RK selection theory holds that all organisms can be located along a continuum based upon their reproductive drives. Those along the R and produce rapidly whenever they can invest little in their offspring. Those along K and reproduce slowly and cautiously and take care in raising their offspring. Evolutionary theories believe males today lean towards R selection because they can reproduce faster without the need of investing in their offspring. Females are K selected because they have fewer offspring but give more care and devotion to them. K-oriented people are more cooperative and sensitive to others, whereas R-oriented people are more cunning and deceptive. Males, therefore, tend to partake in more criminal behavior. In general, people who commit violence crimes seems to exhibit R selection trait, such as premature birth and early and frequently sexual activity. They are more likely to have been neglected as children and to have a short life expectancy. So dito, sinasabi lang na mas nagko-commit ng crime yung mga are mas nagko-commit ng crime yung mga may posibilidad na mag-commit ng crime ang isang bata na parang kulang sa aruga or pinabayaan ng magulang at at ano mas maikli yung buhay nila. Cheater theory. Cheater theory suggests that subpopulation of men has evolved with genes that inclines them towards extremely low parental involvement. Cheater theory suggests that subpopulation of men has evolved with genes that incline them toward extremely low parental involvement. They are sexually aggressive and use their cunning to gain sexual conquest with as many female as possible. So yung mga lalaki daw na sexually yung ito kulang pa rin sa low parental involvement or walang nagpapayo, kulang sa aruga is they are sexually aggressive and use their cunning o ginagamit nila yung pagiging tuso nila para maka-gain ng sexual sa mga babae. Because females would not willingly choose them as mates, they use stealth to gain sexual access, including such tactics as mimicking the behavior or more stable males. There are devious and illegal means to acquire resources they need for sexual domination. Their deceptive reproductive tactics spill over into other endeavors where their talent for irresponsible, opportunistic behavior support their antisocial activities. Deception in reproductive strategies then is linked to deceitful lifestyle. Psychologist Byron Roth notes that cheater-type males may be especially attractive to those younger, less intelligent women who have less intelligent women begin having children at very early age. Kapag ang isa daw babae ay mababa yung intelligence, may posibilidad na maging batang ina. State-sponsored welfare claim route removes the need for potential mate to have resources needed to be able to provide and family takers. With the state meeting their financial needs, these women are attracted to women who are physical attractive and flamboyant. So yung mga babae daw ay madaling ma-attract dun sa mga lalaking physical attractive o mga pogi and flamboyant or mayayaman. Their fleeting courtship process produce children with low IQ, aggressive personalities, and little chance of proper socialization in father absent families. So yung fleeting courtship process o yung mabilisang panliligaw ay nakakapag-produce daw ng batang low IQ. Because the criminal justice system treat them leniently, argues wrote sexually irresponsible men are free to prey on young girls. Over time, their offspring will supply an ever-expanding supply of cheaters who are both antisocial and sexually aggressive. Violence and evolution. In their classic book Homicide, Martin Daly and Margot Wilson suggest that violent offenses are often driven by evolutionary and reproductive factors. High rates of spouse abuse in modern society may be a function of aggressive men seeking to control and possess mate. When females are murdered by their spouse, the motivating factor is typically fear or infidelity and the threat of attachment to a new partner. Infidelity challenge male dominance and future reproductive rights. It comes as no surprise that in some culture, including our own, sexual infidelity discovered in progress by the aggrieved husband is viewed legally as a provocation that justifies retaliatory killing. Men who kill most threat threatened over the potential of losing mates to rivals are the ones most likely to engage sexual violence. Research shows that women in common law marriage, especially those who are younger than their husband, are the greater risk than older married women. Abusive males may fear the potential loss of their younger mates, especially if they're not bound by marriage contract, and may use force to propose of control and possession. Armed robbery is another crime that may have evolutionary underpinnings. Though most robbers are caught and severely punished, it remains an alluring pursuit for men who want to both show their physical prowess and display resources with which to conquer rivals, and attract mates. Violent episodes are far from common among men who unemployed and unmarried. In other words, those who may want to demonstrate their allure to the opposite sex but who are without the benefit of position or wealth. Gender and evolution. Evolutionary concepts have been linked to gender-based difference in the crime rate. To ensure survival of the gene pool and the species, it is beneficial for male or of any species to mate with as many suitable females as possible since each can bear his offspring. Rather than forming stable families and developing parenting skills, the most aggressive males have a strong sexual drives, a reduced ability to form strong emotional bonds, a lack of consequence, and aggressive and violent tendencies. These traits, which express themselves in instances of antisocial behavior throughout the lifespan, beginning in early childhood. In the contrast, because of the period of gestation, females require a secure home and a single stable nurturing partner to ensure their survival. Because of this difference in mating pattern, the most aggressive males mate most often and have the greatest number of offspring. Therefore, over the history of the human species, aggressive males have had the greatest impact on gene pool. The descendants of these aggressive males now account for the disproportionate amount of male aggressions and violence. Evaluation of the biosocial branch of trait theory. Contemporary biosocial theories distinguish their views with Lombrosian deterministic biology. Rather than the suggest that there are born criminals and non-criminals, they maintain that some people carry the potential to be violent or antisocial and and that environmental condition can sometimes trigger the antisocial response. This would explain why some otherwise law-abiding citizens engage in a single, seemingly unexplainable antisocial act, and conversely, why some people with long criminal careers often engage in conventional behavior. It also explains why there are geographic and temporal patterns in the crime rate. People who are predisposed to crime may simply have more opportunities to commit illegal acts in the summer in Angeles and Atlanta than the winter in Benford, New, Hampshire, and Minot, North Dakota, or perhaps their hormonal levels become activated as the temperature rises. The biosocial view is that behavior is product of interacting biological and environment events. Physical impairments may make some people at risk to crime, but it is when they are linked to social and environmental problems such as family dysfunction that they trigger as criminal acts. People who has possess a biological trait that makes them at risk to crime can avoid involvement in antisocial behaviors if their environment does not contain stimuli that trigger aggression and violence. Biological traits, social relationships, and routine opportunities all interact to predict criminal involvement. Concept Summary 5.1 summarize the various biosocial theories of crime. The biosocial theories of crime, biochemical. The major premises of the theory is that crime, especially violence, is a function of diet, vitamin intake, hormonal imbalance, or food allergies. The strength of the theory are that it explain irrational violence. It show how the environment interact with personal trait to influence behavior. The research focuses on the theory are diet, hormones, enzymes, environmental contaminant, and lead intake. Neurological. The major premises of the theory is that criminals and delinquents often suffer brain impairment as measured by the EEG. Attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder, and minimal brain dysfunction are related to antisocial behavior. The strength of the theory are that it explains irrational violence. It shows how the environment interact with personal traits to influence behavior. The research focuses on the theory are ADD, ADHD, learning disabilities, brain injuries, and brain chemistry. Genetic. The majority premises of the theory is that criminal traits and predisposition are inherited. The criminality of parents can be predict the delinquency of children. The strength of the theory are that explain why only a small percentage of youth in high crime areas become chronic offenders. The research focuses of the theory are twin behavior, sibling behavior, and parent-child similarities. Evolutionary. The major premises of the theory is that as the human race evolved, traits and characteristics have become ingrained. Some of these traits make people aggressive and predisposed to commit crime. The strength of the theory are that it helps explain gender difference in the crime rate. The research focuses of the theory are gender difference and understanding human aggression.
Psychological trait theories. The second branch of trait theories focuses on the psychological aspects of crime, including the associations among intelligence, personality learning, and criminal behavior. Psychological theories of crime have a long history. In the English convict, Charles Goring, 1870 to 1919, studied the mental characteristics of 3,000 English convicts. He found little difference in the physical characteristics of criminals and non-criminals, but he uncovered a significant relationship between crime and a condition he referred to as the defective intelligence, which involves such traits as feeble-mindedness, epilepsy, insanity, and defective social instinct. Goring also believed na ang criminal behavior daw ay namamana, kaya kaya daw itong makontrol sa pamamagitan ng pagre-regulate or pagkontrol sa pagreproduction or sa reproduction ng mga family na nakakapag-produce ng mga mentally defective na children, dahil nga daw sabi ni Goring na sa defective intelligence daw is nakakapag-commit ng crime, sila daw yung mga nakakapag-commit ng crime kaysa sa mga may mga normal na pag-iisip, ganun. Gabriel Tarde, 1843 to 1904, is the forerunner of modern day learning theorists. Tarde believed that people learn from one another through a process of imitation. So, sinasabi naman ni Tarde dito na um, ang mga tao ay nakakapag-commit ng crime base sa kanilang mga napapanood sa mga movie, TV shows. Kaya, halimbawa na lang ang genre ay parang horror or hindi, action, ganon. So, sa action, more on bugbugan, ganon, barilan. So, possible na ang mga napapanood nila ay possible na gayahin nila dahil sa tingin nila ay kaya nila itong gawin. At dahil doon ay nakaka-commit ng crime ang mga tao, ganun. Tapos, since the pioneering work of people like Tarde and Goring, psychologists, psychiatrists, and other mental health professionals have long played an active role in formulating criminological theory. In their quest to understand and treat all varieties of abnormal mental conditions, psychologists have encountered clients whose behavior falls within categories society has labeled as criminal, deviant, violent, and antisocial. Now, let's move on to the psychodynamic theory. Psychodynamic, or also known as the psychoanalytic theory, was originated by a Viennese psychiatrist, Sigmund Freud, 1856 to 1939, and has since remained a prominent segment of psychological theory. So, Freud believed that we all carry with us a residue of the most significant emotional attachment of our childhood, which then guide future interpersonal relationships. Today, the term psychodynamic refers to a broad range of theories that focus on the influence of instinctive drives and forces and the importance of developmental processes in shaping personality. Contemporary psychodynamic theory places greater emphasis on conscious experience and its interaction with the unconscious. In addition, to the role that social factors play in development, nonetheless, it still focuses on the influence of early childhood experiences on the development of personality, motivation, and drives. So, sa theory ni Sigmund Freud, dito papasok yung tinatawag natin na id, ego, and superego. Sa classic version ng theory, ang lahat ng tao daw ay nagko-contain ng tatlong part na structure. So, ito nga yung id, ego, and superego. So, pag sinabi natin id, ang pinakatatandaan natin ay pleasure principle. So, kapag pleasure principle, so ito yung dito pumapasok yung it is the primitive part of an individual's mental makeup present at birth. It represents unconscious biological drives for sex, food, and other life-sustaining necessities. The id follows the pleasure principles. So, kaya sinabing pleasure principle sa id dahil nagre-require ito ng instant gratification without concern for the right of others. So, pag sinabing instant gratifications, so kailangan siyang ma-achieve agad without thinking about kung paano nakaka-apekto yun sa iba. So, pag sinabi naman nating ego, ito naman ang tatandaan naman natin dito ay ang reality principle. So, the ego develops early in life when a child begins to learn that his or her wishes cannot be instantly gratified. The ego is the part of the personality that compensates for the demands of the id by helping the individual guide his or her action to remain within the boundaries of the social convention. The ego is guided by the reality principle. It takes into account what is practical and conventional by societal standards. Then, kapag sa superego naman, ang tatandaan natin ay ito ang conscience. So, ang superego ay nagde-develop bilang isang result ng sa pag-incorporate ng personality and the moral standards and values of parents, community, and significant others. It is the moral aspect of an individual's personality. It passes judgments on behavior. The superego is divided into two parts, the conscience and ego ideal. So, ang conscience ang nagsasabi kung anong tama at mali. At ito naman ang parang nag-force sa ego na mag-i-control yung id, and it directs the individual into morally acceptable and responsible behaviors, which may not be pleasurable. Psychosexual stages of human development. The most basic human drive present at birth is called eros, and it is the instinct to preserve and create life. And the other one is the death instinct, or also known as thanatos, which is expressed as aggression. So, eros is expressed sexually. It consequently happens very early in their development, and humans experience sexuality which is expressed by seeking pleasure through various parts of the body. So during the first year of life, a child attains pleasure by sucking and biting. Freud called this the oral stage. And during the second and third years of life, the focus of sexual attention is on the elimination of bodily wastes. It is called the anal stage. And the phallic stage occurs during the third year, when children focus their attention on their genitals. Males begin to have sexual feelings for their mothers, or also known as the Oedipus complex, and girls for their fathers, the Electra complex. And latency begins at the age of 6. And during this period, feelings of sexuality are repressed until the genital begins at puberty. This marks, and let's move to the psychodynamics of antisocial behavior. The psychologists have long linked criminality to abnormal mental states produced by early childhood trauma. For example is Alfred Adler, the founder of individual psychology, and he is the one who coined the term inferiority complex to describe people. It is the people who have feelings of inferiority and compensate for them with the drive for superiority. And controlling others may help reduce personal inadequacies. Erikson described the identity crisis, a period of serious personal questioning people in an effort to determine their own values and sense of direction. Adolescents undergoing an identity crisis might exhibit out-of-control behavior and experiment with drugs and other forms of deviance. The psychoanalyst whose work is most closely associated with criminality is August Acorn. After examining many delinquent youths, Acorn concluded that societal stress, though damaging, could not alone result in a life of crime unless a predisposition existed that psychologically prepared youth for antisocial acts. This mental stage, which he labeled latent delinquency, is found in youngsters who personally requires them to act in these ways. The first one is seek immediate gratification. The second one, consider satisfying their personal needs more important than relating to others. And the last one is satisfy instinctive urges without considering right and wrong. The psychodynamic model of the criminal offender depicts an aggressive, frustrated person dominated by events that occurred early in childhood. Perhaps because they may have suffered unhappy experiences in childhood or had families that could not provide the proper love and care, criminals suffer from weak or damaged egos that make them unable to cope with conventional society. Weak egos are associated with immaturity, poor social skills, and excessive dependence on others. People with weak egos may be easily led into crime by antisocial peers and drug abuse. Some offenders have underdeveloped superegos and consequently lack internalized representations of those behaviors that are punished in conventional society. They commit crimes because they have difficulty understanding the consequences of their actions. And offenders may suffer from a wide variety of mood or behavior disorders. They may be histrionic, depressed, antisocial, or narcissistic, and they may suffer from conduct disorders, which include long histories of antisocial behavior or mood disorders characterized by disturbance in expressed emotions. Among the latter is bipolar disorder, in which moods alternate between periods of wild elation and deep depression. Some offenders are given by an unconscious desire to be punished for prior sins, either real or imaginary. As a result, they may violate the law to gain attention or to punish their parents. And according to this view, crime is a manifestation of feelings of oppression and people's inability to develop the proper psychological defenses and rationales to keep these feelings under control. Criminality enables troubled people to survive by producing positive psychic results. It helps them to feel free and independent, and it gives them the possibility of excitement and the chance to use their skills and imagination. Crime also provides them with the promise of positive gain. It allows them to blame others for their predicament, and it gives them a chance to rationalize the sense of failure. Now, let's move on to another theory, which is the attachment theory. And attachment theory, a view most closely associated with psychologist John Bowlby, is also connected to the psychodynamic tradition. Bowlby believed that the ability to form attachments, that is, emotionally bond to another person, has important lasting psychological implications that follow people across the lifespan. Attachments are formed soon after birth when infants bond with their mothers. So, sinasabi dito na attachments are formed soon after birth when infants bond with their mothers. So, yung mga infants daw kapag gusto nila ng attention sa mother nila, kapag kunyari busy yung mother nila, ganun, mag-start sila mag-cry, mag-tantrum sila para mag-gain yung attention ng mother nila. And ginagawa nila ito para maiwasan or hindi na sila iwan ng mother nila and mag-focus na sa kanila yung mother nila. Kasi, parang namimiss nila agad yung mother nila dahil nagkakaroon sila ng attachment. Then, sinasabi din dito na itong behavior na to ay hindi lamang nangyayari sa mga tao, kundi nangyayari din to sa lahat ng mammals, indicating that separation anxiety may be instinctual or evolutionary. After all, attachment figures, especially the mother, provide support and care, and without attachment, an infant would be helpless and could not survive. And sinasabi pa dito na si Bowlby also challenged Freud's view of the development of the ego and superego, claiming that at birth, these were bound up in the relationship with one's mother. And Bowlby's most important finding was to grow up mentally healthy. The infant and young child should experience a warm, intimate, and continuous relationship with his mother, in which both find satisfaction and enjoyment. At sabi pa dito na sa view na to, yung mga bata na parang hindi sila nakadevelop ng attachment sa kanilang parents, ay sila yung mostly na nagkakaroon ng psychological disorders kasi nga hindi sila nabibigyan ng pagmamahal, ng care, kaya sila yung sila yung prone sa psychological disorders kagaya na ADHD or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. They may be impulsive and have difficulty concentrating and consequently experience difficulty in school. As adults, they often have difficulty initiating and sustaining relationships with others and find it difficult to sustain romantic relationships. Criminologists have linked people having detachment problems with a variety of antisocial behaviors, including sexual assault and child abuse. It has been suggested that boys disproportionately experience disrupted attachment and that these disruptions are causally related to disproportionate rates of male offending. So now, let us move on to the mental disorders and crime. And according to the psychodynamic tradition, traumatic life events can bring about severe mental disorders that have been linked to the onset of crime, and deviance mental disorders typically involve a psychological condition that disrupts thinking, feeling, and other important psychological processes. And they may cause people to deviate from social expectations and impair their everyday functioning. Less severe forms are mood disorders, prolonged and intense emotional upheavals that shape and color a person's psychic life. A more severe mental disorder is referred to as a psychosis and is characterized by derangement of personality and loss of contact with reality, thereby causing deterioration of normal social functioning. These are discussed more fully below. So, ito. So, let's discuss it thoroughly. Mood disorders and crime. Ang mood disorders and crime ay isang factor ng mental disorders and crime. So, psychologists recognize a variety of mental disorders that may be linked to antisocial behavior. Adolescents who are frequently uncooperative and hostile, and which who seem to be much more difficult than other children at the same age may be suffering from a psychological condition known as disruptive behavioral disorder, which can take on two distinct forms: oppositional deviant disorder or ODD, tama ba? Defiant pala. Oppositional defiant disorder and conduct disorder or CD. Children suffering from ODD experience an ongoing pattern of uncooperative, defiant, and hostile behavior towards authority figures that seriously interferes with the youngster's day-to-day functioning. So, sinasabi rin na, nasa na ba yung function? So, sinasabi din na ang symptoms ng ODD ay nag-include ng parang loss of temper and constant arguing with adults, defying adults or refusing adult requests or rules, deliberately annoying others, blaming others for mistakes or misbehavior, being angry and resentful, being spiteful or vindictive, swearing or using obscene language, or having low esteem. The person with ODD is moody and easily frustrated and may abuse drugs as a form of self-medication. So, ito naman, ang CD naman ay kino-considered as a more serious group of behavioral and emotional problems. Ang children and adolescents na merong CD ay mas nahihirapan sila na sumunod sa mga rules at mag-behave sa socially accepted ways. They are often viewed by other children, adults, and social agencies as severely antisocial. Research shows that they are frequently involved in such activities as bullying, fighting, committing sexual assaults, and cruelty to animals. So, ano nga bang nagkukos ng CD? So, numerous biosocial and psychological factors are suspected. There is evidence, for example, that interconnections between the frontal lobes and the other brain regions may influence CD. There is also research showing that levels of serotonin can influence the onset of CD and that CD has been shown to aggregate in families, suggesting a genetic basis of the disorder. ODD and CD are not only mood disorders associated with antisocial behavior. Some people find it impossible to cope with feelings of oppression or depression. Research shows that people who are clinically depressed are more likely to engage in a variety of illegal acts. Some people suffer from alexithymia. So, ang alexithymia is a deficit in emotional cognition that prevents them from being aware of their feelings or being able to understand or talk about their thoughts and emotions. They seem robotic and emotionally dead. Others may suffer from eating disorders and are likely to use fasting, vomiting, and drugs to lose weight or keep them from gaining weight. So, psychosis and crime. David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, or the 44 caliber killer, is a noted serial killer who went on a rampage from 1976 to 1977. Claimed that his killing spree began when he received messages from a neighbor's dog. His symptoms made him appear to suffer from a severe form of mental illness referred to as psychosis, characterized by extreme impairment of a person's ability to think clearly, respond emotionally, communicate effectively, understand reality, and behave appropriately. So, sinasabi din dito na ang psychosis daw ay parang nagkakaroon ng ang mga taong may psychosis ay nakakarinig ng mga boses na hindi naman talaga nag-exist, naghahallucinate, at they make inappropriate behavioral responses. So, makikita natin dito sa binigay na example na to na ang mga tao, ang mostly na nakakapag-commit ng crime ay ang mga taong may problema sa pag-iisip or merong mental problem. And Richard Dorn and his associates examined the association between mental disorder, and violence using a longitudinal sample of about 35,000 subjects. They found that when compared to the mentally sound, people suffering mental illness were significantly more likely to engage in subsequent violent episodes, especially if they abused drugs and alcohol. The diagnosed mentally ill also appear in arrest and court statistics at a rate of disproportionate to their presence in the population, and they may also be prone to recidivism once released from prison.
Behavioral theory. Psychological behavior theory maintains that human actions are developed through learning experiences, rather than focusing on unconscious personality traits or cognitive development patterns produced early in childhood. Behavioral theories are concerned with the actual behaviors people engage in during the course of their daily lives. According to the behavioral theory, ang behavior ng isang individual ay nade-develop mula sa mga experiences and interactions from other people. Kung ano yung behavior natin ay dinedepende natin sa magiging reaction nila, because our behavior are supported by positive and negatives, which is the rewards or yung good behavior natin na nakukuha, and the punishments or negative reactions. And also, under the behavioral theory, nag-review ang crime based on life situations. Social learning theory is the branch of behavior theory most relevant to criminology. Social learning theories, most notably Albert Bandura, argue that people are not actually born with the ability to act violently, but that they learn to be aggressive through their life experiences. These experiences includes personally observing others acting aggressively to achieve some goals, or people being rewarded for violent acts on televisions or in movies. Under this branch of behavioral theory, mas pinapatunayan na ang isang tao o individual ay walang kakayahan na maging bayolente sa kanyang pagkasilang. Ito ay na-adapt lamang mula sa kanyang mga experiences at sa kanyang mga nakakasalamuha. Naibibase rin sa mental at physical traits ang pagiging bayolente ng isang tao. At ito ay depende sa iba't ibang sitwasyon dahil nagkakaroon ng impluwensya kung paano nila binibigyan ng kahulugan ang kanilang past experiences. May example natin dito ang isang individual na nakulong dahil sa drunk driving. Maaaring ito ay magsilbing aral upang hindi niya na ulitin ito, at sa kabilang banda naman, kapag nakasuhan ng isang tao ng drunk driving, maaaring gawin niya lamang itong nakakatawang memorya para ikwento sa kanyang mga kaibigan. Social learning and violence. Social learning theories view violence as something learned through a process called behavior modeling. In modern society, are usually modeled after three principal sources. Family interaction. Studies of family life shows that aggressive have parents who use similar tactics when dealing with others. Sa family interaction, namamana o na-adapt ng isang bata yung pag-uugali ng mga kapamilya niya. Environmental experiences. People who reside in areas in which violence is a daily occurrence are more likely to act violently than those who dwell in low-crime areas whose norms stress conventional behavior. Dito naman na-adapt na yung pagiging bayolente sa lugar na ginagalawan niya. Kung madalas na nagkakaroon ng away o gulo, ay mas magiging bayolente ang isang tao kumpara sa isang taong nakatira sa tahimik at payapang lugar. Mass media. Films and television shows commonly depict violence graphically. Moreover, violence is often portrayed as an acceptable behavior, especially for heroes who never have to face legal consequences for their actions. Nagkakaroon din naman ng epekto yung mga napapanood natin sa TV o movies sa ating behavior, lalo na kapag action movies ito kung saan inaakala natin na okay lang gawin yung isang bagay kasi wala namang kaparusahan. Naipapakita pa ito sa good example sa mga manonood. Studies have shown that this content also produces aggression in the more successful members of lower class groups who have been led to believe they can succeed but then they have thwarted in their aspirations. While it is uncertain how their relationship is constructed, it is apparently complex. No matter how deprived some individuals are, they will not resort to violence. It seems evident that people's perception of their relative deprivations have different effects on their aggressive responses. Does violent media causes violent crime? Media violence can provide aggressive scripts that children store in memory. Repeated exposure to these scripts can increase their attention and lead to changes in attitudes. Children learn from what they observe in the same way they learn cognitive and social skills from their parents and friends. Children learn to be violent from television. Television violence increases the arousal levels of viewers and make them more prone to act aggressively. Studies measuring the galvanic skin response of a subject, a physical indication of arousal based on the amount of electricity conducted across. In summary, social learning theories have said that the following 4 factors may contribute to violent and/or aggressive behavior. An event that heightens arousal, such as a person frustrating or provoking another through physical assault or verbal abuse. Aggressive skills. Learn aggressive responses from other observing others, either personally or through the media. Expected outcomes. The belief that aggression will somehow be rewarded. Rewards can come in the form of reducing tension or anger, gaining some financial reward, building a self-esteem, or gaining the praise of others. Consistency of behavior values. The belief gained from observing others that aggression is justified and appropriate given the circumstances of the current situation.
Good day, Sir Jopper. My name is Reden Rodjo. I'm the one who's assigned to discuss the cognitive theory. Cognitive theory. Cognitive perspective is focused on mental processes and how people perceive and mentally represent the world around them and solve problems. Pinapaliwanag nito ang iba't ibang pag-uugali ng isang kriminal bilang isang depekto sa moral na pag-iisip. Tinutulungan din tayo nito na maunawaan kung ano ang nag-uugnay sa personalidad at antas ng katalinuhan ng isang tao. Today, there are several subdisciplines within the cognitive area. The first one is moral development. The way people morality represent and reason about the world. Humanistic psychology, a branch of psychology that stresses self-awareness and getting in touch with feelings. The last one is information processing, a branch of cognitive psychology that focuses on the way people process, store, encode, retrieve, and manipulate information to make decisions and solve problems. Moral and intellectual development. The moral and intellectual development branch of cognitive psychology is perhaps the most important of criminological theory. Jean Piaget, 1896 to 1980. The founder of this approach hypothesized that people's reasoning processes develop in an orderly fashion, beginning at birth, continuing into their maturity. Lawrence Kohlberg first applied the concept of moral development to issues in criminology. He found that people travel through a stage of moral development during which their decision and judgment of issues of right and wrong are made on different reasons. Posible na mayroong seryosong dahilan kung bakit nila napagdesisyonan na gawin ito, hindi tulad ng mga normal na mamamayan na sumusunod sa batas. Sinasabi din na ang kriminal ay may mababang moral judgment development kaysa sa mga hindi kriminal. The decision not to commit crimes may be influenced by one's stage of moral development. People at the lowest levels report that they are deterred from crime because of their fear of sanction. Sinasabi dito na napipigilan ng mga tao na gumawa ng krimen dahil sa kanilang takot sa mga maaaring maging parusa kung sakaling gagawa sila ng krimen. Moral development theory suggests that people who obey the law simply to avoid punishment or have outlooks mainly characterized by self-mirrors are more likely to commit crimes than those who view the law as something that benefits all of society. Those at higher stage of moral reasoning tend to sympathize with rights of others and are associated with conventional behaviors such as honesty, generosity, and nonviolence. Information processing. When cognitive theorists who study information processing try to explain antisocial behavior, they do so in terms of mental perception and how people use information to understand their environment. When people make decisions, they engage in a sequence of cognitive thought processes. The first one is encode information so that it can be interpreted. The second one is search for a proper response. Decide on the most appropriate action. The last one is act on the decision. Shaping perceptions. To violence-prone kids, they seem more aggressive than they actually are and seem to intend them ill when there is no reason for alarm. According to information processing theory, as these children mature, they use fewer cues than most people to process information. Ang iba ay gumagamit ng karahasan upang makuha kung ano ang gusto nila at ang iba naman ay para makaganti. There is evidence that delinquent boys who engage in theft are more likely to exhibit cognitive deficits than non-delinquent youth. For example, they have a poor sense of time, leaving them incapable of dealing with or solving social problems in an effective manner. The information processing theory has been used to explain the occurrence of date rape. Naniniwala daw ang mga lalaki na kapag tumanggi ang kanilang kadate na makipagtalik, iniisip nila na baka naglalaro lang at gusto nila na pinipersa sila, ngunit hindi nila naiisip na baka ayaw talaga at maaari pa silang makasuhan sa mga ginagawa nila. Next. Errors in cognition and information processing have been used to explain the behavior of child abusers. Distorted thinking patterns abusers express include the following. Child as a sexual being. Children are perceived as being able to and wanting to engage in sexual activity with adults. Nature of harm. The offender perceives that sexual activity does not cause harm and may not fact be beneficial to child. Entitlement. The child abuser perceives that he is superior and more important than others, and hence is able to have sex with whomever and whenever he wants. Dangerous word. An offender perceives that others are abusive and rejecting in he must fight to be safe. Uncontrollable. The word is perceived as uncontrollable and circumstances are outside of his control. Next. Cause and treatment of cognitive deficits. Why do some individuals develop cognitive deficits that prevent them from conforming to social expectations and adjusting properly to society? Ang pangunahing dahilan ay maaaring magkaroon ng pinsala sa bahagi ng utak, sa frontal lobe, that controls executive function, attention, working memory, verbal skills, and intelligence, such as damage can occur prenatal as a result of birth trauma or maternal substance abuse, or even later in development as a result of child abuse or injury. People whose cognitive processes are skewed or faulty may be relying on mental scripts learned in childhood that tell them how to interpret events, what to expect, how they should react, and what the outcome of that interaction should be. Maaring hindi natuto ang mga bata ng tamang gawain sa pamamagitan ng pagmamasid sa ibang kaganapan, lalo na kung nakikita nila mismo ang mga maling gawain sa sarili nilang mga magulang. Pwede itong makaapekto sa kanila hanggang sa pagtanda. Halimbawa nito ay ang child abuse o pang-aabuso sa mga bata. Maaari nila itong dalhin hanggang sa pagtanda at maaari din nila itong gawin sa mga magiging anak nila. Next, treatment based on how people process information takes into account that people are more likely to respond aggressively to a provocation because thoughts tend to intensity, the insult or otherwise stirred feelings of anger. Cognitive therapist. During the course of treatment, sila ay nagtangka na tulungan ang mga taong hindi makontrol ang kanilang galit sa pamamagitan ng pagtingin sa mga maaaring maging solusyon sa halip na gumanti. And here is Mr. Moleno to discuss the psychological traits and characteristics.
Intelligence and crime. Intelligence refers to a person's ability to reason, think abstractly, understand complex ideas, learn from experience, and discover solutions to complex problems. It was long believed that people who maintain a low or below average intelligence quotient or IQ were at risk to criminality. Sinasabi na pag ang isang tao ay mayroong mababang IQ ay malaki ang chance na maging criminal or mag-commit ng crime. According to the nature theory, intelligence is largely determined genetic, genetically. Ancestry determines IQ, and low intelligence as demonstrated by low IQ is linked to criminal behavior. When the newly developed IQ tests were administered to inmates of prisons and juvenile training schools in the first decades of the 20th century, the nature position gained support because a very large proportion of the inmates scored low on the test. During his study in 1920, Henry Goddard found that many institutionalized persons were what he considers feeble-minded He concluded that at least half of all juvenile delinquents were mental defectives. In 1926, William William Healy and Augusta Brunner tested groups delinquent boys in Chicago and Boston and found that 37% were subnormal in intelligence. They concluded that delinquents were 5 to 10 times or more likely to be mentally deficient than normal boys. These and other early studies were embraced as proof that low IQ scores identified potentially delinquent children and that's a correlation existence between inmate low intelligence and deviant behavior. IQ tests were believed to measure the inborn genetic makeup of individuals, and many criminologists accepted the idea that individuals with substandard IQs were predisposed toward delinquency and adult criminality. Sinasabi yun ng nature theory that intelligence is largely determined genetically and that low intelligence is linked to criminal behavior. Sabi sa nature theory na pag ang isang tao is merong low intelligence or low IQ, mas malaki ang chance nitong malink sa pagkakaroon ng crime or nakakaapekto to sa isang criminal behavior niya. Next is nurture theory. The rise of culture, culturally sensitive explanations of human behavior in the 1930s led to the nurture school of intelligence. Nurture theory states that intelligence must be viewed as partly biological but primarily sociological, because intelligence is not inherited. Low IQ parents do not necessarily produce low IQ children. Nurture theories discredited the notion that people commit crimes because they have low IQs. Instead, they postulated the environment, stimulation from parents, relatives, social contacts, schools, peers, groups, and innumerable environ- others create a child's IQ level, and that low IQs result from an environment that also encourages delinquent and criminal behavior. Thus, if low IQ scores are recorded among criminals, this score may reflect criminals' cultural background, not their mental ability. Sabi dito si Nurture Theory, the view that intelligence is not inherited but is largely a product of environment. Low IQ scores do not cause crime but may result from the same environment factors. Sinasabi sa nurture theory na ang isang magulang ay hindi nagpo-produce ng isang magulang na may low IQ is hindi nagpo-propose na nag tawag dito. Sorry. Sinasabi na isang magulang na may low IQ ay hindi din nagpo-produce ng batang may low IQ or anak na may low IQ. Kasi ang IQ is parang hindi siya namamana, hindi siya inherited. Yung IQ, naaaral yan ng mga kabataan at mayroon na nakaka-apekto to sa environment. Meron tong environmental factor. Next is debating intelligence effects. In the 1970s, Travis Hirschi and Michael Hindelang resurrected that IQ crime debate. Their examination of then existing research data led them to the conclusion that IQ is a more important factor than race and socioeconomic class for predicting criminal involvement. They proposed that low IQ increases the likelihood of criminal behavior through its effect on school performance. Kasi sabi na pagiging low IQ ng isang tao ay nag-i-increase or may risk or may malaking risk para mag-commit ng isang crime or crimen. Kids with low IQs do poorly in school. School failure and academic incompetence are highly related to delinquency and later to adult criminality. Kasi sabi din dito na ang kabataan na may low IQ is hindi na or nagpe-perform siya ng mahina sa klase at ang school failures ay related sa delinquency, and to the adult criminality. Because of their prominence in the field, PhD and Hindi Lang's interferences were taken quite seriously. Richard Ernstein and Charles Murray came down firmly for an IQ crime link in the controversial book entitled The Bell Curve. Studies using large data sets have found a direct linkage between IQ and crime. Macro level state and country data that IQ and crime rates are associated. States and countries whose residents have higher IQ experience lower crime rates than those with less intelligent citizens. On an international level, some research claim that the nation whose population score higher on IQ tests have lower crime rates than those with lower scoring population. Kasi sabi sa macro level state, ang isang country na mayroong mga residente na may mataas na IQ ay merong mababang crime rate. Ganon din sa international level na ang isang bansa na mayroong mataas na IQ test ay meron ding lower crime rates. Next is IQ controversy. While some studies cited above found an IQ crime association, others suggest that IQ level has ne- negli- negligible influence on criminal behavior. An evaluation of existing knowledge on intelligence conducted by the American Psychological Association concluded that the strength of an IQ crime link was very low. Those who question the IQ crime link suggest that any association may be based on spurious data and inadequate research methodologies. First, IQ tests are biased and reflect middle-class values. As a result, socially disadvantaged people do poorly on IQ tests, and members of the group are also the one most likely to commit crime. The low IQ crime association is spurious. People who suffer disadvantage such as poverty and limited educational resources do poorly on IQ tests and also commit crime. Sabi dito na low IQ crime association na ang isang tao or isang lugar na nakakaranas ng kahirapan at merong limited lang na kakayahan upang makapag-aral ay meron talagang ay nagiging dahilan kung bakit merong mga taong merong low IQ at nagko-commit talaga sila ng crime. The measurement of intelligence is often varied and haphazard, and result may depend on the particular method used. The correlation between intelligence and antisocial behavior using IQ tests as a measure of aptitude is slight. It is stronger if attendance in special programs or special school is used as an indicator of intellectual ability. People with low IQs are stigmatized and negatively labeled by middle-class decision makers such as police officers, teachers, and guidance counselors. It is not a low IQ that causes criminal behavior, but the reaction to negative labels, alienation, stigma, and resentment. Sabi dito na hindi dahilan ng pagkakaroon ng low IQ para mag-cause ng isang crime. Minsan, nadadala na lang sila sa mga reaksyon ng mga tao. Maintaining a low IQ may influence some criminal patterns such as arson and sex crimes, but not others, further clouding waters. The association between IQ and crime is curvilinear. People with very high or very low IQs commit less crime than those who fall in the middle. Ang sabi dito na ang mga people o tao na mayroong high or very low IQ is nagko-commit ng less crimes kumpara sa mga taong nasa middle lang or nasa gitna ng very high or very low IQ. It is difficult to research using official record data may be flawed it's possible that criminals with high IQs are better able to avoid detection and punishment than low IQ people. Research using data from arrestees may omit the more intelligent members of the criminal subclass, and even if they are caught, IQ offenders are less likely to be convicted and punished because their favorable treatment helps higher IQ offenders avoid the pains of criminal punishment. It lessens their chance of recidivism. Sabi dito na merong meron talagang discrimination through high IQ and low IQ, kasi if you have a high IQ, ikaw ay less likely to be convicted and punishment because nga nagpe-favor sa iyo yung treatment at tinutulungan mga higher IQ na offenders para maiwasan na maranasan ng mga criminal punishments.
Public policy implications of trait theory. Biological and psychological perspectives on criminality have affected crime control and prevention strategy throughout the past century. As a result, front-end or primary prevention initiatives have emerged, aiming to address personal issues, therefore, before they become criminal. Thousands of family therapy groups, substance abuse clinics, and mental health associations exist in the United States to help people in this situation. Referrals to these facilities are made by teachers, employers, family, welfare, welfare agencies, and others. These surveys are found on the idea that if a person's issues can be addressed before they become overwhelming, certain crimes can be avoided in the future. Individual therapy to behavior modification are only a few of the psychologically based therapeutic options. Individuals are more likely to behave angrily to provocation if their thoughts magnify the insult or otherwise generate sentiments of anger. Therefore, therapy based on how people absorb information takes that into consideration. In order to help explosive persons to manage aggressive impulse, cognitive therapists train them to see social provocations as issues that need to be solved rather than retaliation. Primary prevention programs, treatment programs that seek to correct or remedy personal problems before they manifest themselves as crime. Secondary prevention programs, treatment programs aim at helping offenders after they've been identified. Tertiary prevention programs, crime control is a crime control and prevention programs that may be a requirement of a probation order, part of a diversionary sentence, or aftercare at the end of prison sentence.
Trait theory and crime prevention. Recently, criminologists Michael Roque, Brandon Welch, and Adrian Rain reviewed treatment programs that consider biological and psychological traits and condition in their approach. They believe that this technique might work because effective crime prevention strategies start from the premises that responding to crime after it happens is a missed opportunity. Treatment and prevention must take place before a crime occurs. Crime prevention, according to the review, can be crafted in the same manner that doctors avoid public health problems rather than identifying and treating a problem after it occurs. Treatment based on psychological and biological traits identify at-risk people and then design plans to prevent future bouts of antisocial behaviors. One approach has been parenting programs that are aimed at treating neuropsychological or cognitive deficit, along with a host of other risk factors, such as impulsivity. One technique is to teach mothers to avoid the hazards of smoking or ingesting narcotics during pregnancy, in an attempt to help reduce neuropsychological impairment to the infant. Some programs take place in a school setting, and rich preschool programs are designed to provide economically disadvantaged children with stimulus that help them cognitively as well as provide them enriching experience that their parents are unlikely to provide at home. The main goal here is to develop improve cognitive skills, enhance school readiness, and encourage social and emotional development. Other programs are aimed at the prevention of serious mental illness or disorder. There is strong evidence that a variety of illnesses, ranging from psychosis to anxiety disorder, can be successfully treated before their effects have an overtly negative impact. Research suggests that the earlier the intervention, the better. It is possible that treatment will begin during pregnancy to the first 2 years of life, as technology can now measure growth and maturation of cognitive function during this period. That all for the report of Group 2 about trait theory. Thank you. That's all for the report of Group 2 about trait theory.